This video is sponsored by Squarespace. More about them later. I did a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokémon Y using only fighting-type Pokémon. In a Nuzlocke, if one of my teammates faints in battle, it's dead forever. And the rest of the rules are simple, so with that, let's get ready to rumble. My morning starts by fittingly being assaulted by a bird. After getting out of my PJs and into some swanky Parisian swag, I make my way to Aquacord Town where I can choose my starter. I go with Chespin, though since he's not a fighting type and won't be until his final form, Steve Austin will be chilling in the Stone Cold box. But not before helping us catch our first usable encounter from Route 22, a Riolu named Von Erich. Risky, I know. Since Riolu is a baby Pokemon, Von Erich is guaranteed to have 3 perfect IVs, one of which is an attack, at least somewhat compensating for his timid nature. After some quick bonding, the little pup evolves into the all-powerful Lucario, so surely victory over the first gym leader is all but guaranteed, right? Wrong! See, because the level cap is so low, Von Erich's best attacking move is Quick Attack, which does pretty pitiful damage. For example, my Anubian Brawler can't even one-shot a Zigzagoon. So we're already going into the fight against Viola's 2 bug types at a disadvantage. Now, fortunately, her Surskit, despite a battle cry that strikes fear into all those who hear it, is not much of a threat. 3 quick attacks take her out at the expense of just 7 of our hit points. And the XP from our tactical triumph gets Von Erich to level 13 in time to face off against Viola's Vivian, a truly problematic little pest. Not only is she significantly bulkier than her grounded teammate, she can also increase that bulk with Harden, which wouldn't be much of an issue if she didn't also have Infestation, a move that does hardly any outright damage thanks to our quad resistance, but one that continues to do passive damage at the end of each turn. And with Von Erich continuously losing 5 HP turn after turn as Vivian slowly builds up her defense, things are looking grim. Our bipedal furry bait does his best, but with Viola's potion bringing Vivian back into the green, victory slips further and further away. There's a moment of hope as Von Erich is finally freed from our foe's infestation, but even then, it's just not enough. Tragically close to victory, Von Erich finally falls, and with that, attempt 1 is done. But Von Erich the First got a lot closer than I expected, and that near triumph is enough to give me hope that this is possible, even without using super training to max out our EVs, which feels pretty cheap, especially this early in the game. So with our second Von Erich locked and loaded, let's see if things go a bit better in attempt 2. Right away, Surskit throws us a bone by wasting a turn going for Water Sport. You're throwing, Surskit, what are you doing? Since Von Erich no longer has a minus attack nature, our first 2 quick attacks also do just enough damage to put Surskit into healing range, which means that Viola blows her potion here instead of on Vivian. So as the little Water Strider falls, we're in a significantly better position than we were on attempt 1. Vivian remains, and again our quick attacks do very little damage against the French Fiend, who once again proceeds to set up Hardens. But this time, Lady Luck waves her flag for the US of A, because on our 3rd quick attack, Von Erich scores a critical hit, all but guaranteeing us the victory. And even without it, things were looking good, since for some reason Vivian decided to just not set up Infestation. 2 turns later, she falls to a final quick attack. So it just goes to show ya, if at first you don't succeed, try again and hope that the RNG you have no control over happens to roll in your favor. It's called skill, baby. Look it up. After just 2 attempts, the insect badge is ours, and we're off to the big city by way of Route 4. After linking up with Professor Sycamore, ruthlessly defeating his orphans with the recently acquired TM for return, adopting one of said orphans, and then immediately releasing him into the wild, we meet the most well-adjusted man in France, and then get assaulted by the second most well-adjusted man in France. On the other side of Trauma Tunnel, I can finally get some more teammates, starting first with the encounter on Route 5, which turns out to be a horde of level 5 Scraggy. I was hoping for Pancham here, since I've never used one in a Nuzlocke, but Scraggy's probably better, especially because in order to evolve Pancham into Pangoro, you need to have a Dark-type Pokemon on your team, and since Scraggy is the only other fighting type that is also Dark-type, and I'm only allowing myself 1 encounter per route, I would have needed to bend the Nuzlocke rules to actually use Pangoro. Anyways, this horde of Scraggy is actually kind of an issue, because I need to knock out 4 of them before getting the chance to catch the survivor. And in the process process of doing that, these little gremlins managed to use Leer to repeatedly drop Von Erich's defense, which wouldn't be an issue if Scraggy didn't also know Low Kick to threaten with super effective damage. And they also know Sand Attack to drop my accuracy, which theoretically makes it harder to get the KOs needed to start throwing balls. But despite 5 Sand Attacks, Von Erich clutches up to connect with his 4th return to take out the penultimate gang member, though the final Scraggy seems to take that personally by immediately retaliating with a Low Kick that drops Von Erich down to just 17 HP. That takes guts, kid. We need guts on this team. Unfortunately, now I'm in a tough spot. One more Low Kick and Von Erich is dead, so there's an argument to be made that it's better to run away and not risk a wipe, but a part Dark type is invaluable in a fighting type only run, granting us an immunity to Psychic type moves that would otherwise do super effective damage to my team. So the reward is absolutely worth the risk, and besides, they call me Dr. One Ball HG for a reason. So the reward is absolutely worth the risk, and besides, they call me Dr. One Ball HG for a reason. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for The Undertaker. And before we undertake any more of this playthrough, I want to talk to you about the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. Squarespace is an online platform that helps you build and manage your own website, whether that's an online store for your business or a personal blog for your thoughts. Using their guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint, you can choose from curated layouts and styling options to build a distinguished and professional online presence from the ground up. It makes the perfect website tailored to whatever your brand or business is, and optimizes the site for every device. Plus, with integrated SEO tools, your passion project will show up more often to more people. I use Squarespace.com to create PoppyHG.com, the only destination to find curated pictures of my corgi puppy Poppy. But I also added all sorts of bells and whistles to my site, like a donation button and a whole video library hosted right on Squarespace's platform. With additional features like analytic information about the traffic of your website and online stores to help monetize your passion, you're sure to get the most out of your Squarespace subscription. So if you're looking to start a website for your business or hobby or corgi, then you should check out squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch your website, you can use my custom link to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and to you for using my links. It really helps me out a lot. Now, let's get back to the video. After some romantically tinged daytime fireworks and then toppling Snorlax with a Low Kick, our quest to recruit more fighters continues. On Route 7, I catch a Krogunk named CM Punk. In Connecting Cave, I snag a Metatite, or Metatite for the unimaginative children and depressed adults in the audience. And on Route 8, we meet Ric Flair the Mienfoo, who will be borderline useless until level 50 when he evolves. Unnovan evolution levels are a hell of a drug. China the Machop from Glittering Cave makes a full team of 6, right in time to face off against the second gym leader Grant. But 6 fighting types versus 2 rock types is hardly fair. In general, Kalos gym leaders are excruciatingly underwhelming, only ever having at most 3 Pokemon. So, as I've done in the past, I'll be adding the anime addendum to my rule set for this playthrough, which states that for all Gym Leader and Elite Four battles, I must use the same number of Pokemon as my opponent. Admittedly, this doesn't make Grant any harder since we have such a great matchup into his rock types, but it will make some fights more than just trivial. But yeah, Von Erich one-shots Amara here, and though I do try to spread the love by having the Undertaker tap in to deal with Tyrunt, a flinch from Stomp means that Von Erich needs to come back in and take his second KO to win us the battle. With that though, we can pull all of our teammates back out of the box, except China. She's staying because just north of Silage City on Route 10 lies one of the best encounters in the game, Hawlucha. And though he too is a bit risky to catch, it's well worth the trouble. Mysterio is just a phenomenally well-rounded Pokemon, and like Von Erich, grants my team another speedy powerhouse with which to deal damage, while the rest of my babies sit in their frail base forms for just a few more level caps. Route 11 offers 3 potential fighting type encounters, all of which are quite good. I end up finding the Red Muppet first, so Batista joins the squad as our bulkiest fighter so far, which means the team is looking pretty good as we head to the Tower of Mastery, where the first of 5 fights against our rival Serena awaits. Serena has the potential to be a particular pain in the ass because her zippy Meowstic knows both Psychic type and Fairy type moves, which can be used to hit all but one of my Pokemon for super effective damage. The good news is that the one who only takes neutral damage from both attacks, Von Erich, is the perfect counter to Meowstic. Serena almost always starts with a Fake Out, which, in addition to doing a tiny amount of chip via our held Rocky Helmet, also triggers Von Erich's Steadfast ability, granting him a speed boost. This means that he moves first on the following turn and can fire off a super effective Shadow Claw, which isn't enough to kill, but since Meowstic doesn't threaten with the KO in return, we're free to beat the kitty on the following turn with one more Shadow Claw. That brings out problematic Pokemon number 2, Braixen. He too knows the Psychic type move Psybeam, but also obviously knows a Fire type move to threaten Von Erich. For now, it's Fire Spin, which wouldn't actually do much damage, but would lock us in, so it's better to immediately switch to the Undertaker. With the residual chip from Fire Spin, this is gonna be really tight. Tighter than I expected, but with our held Oranberry, we should be okay. Our first payback brings Braixen down into the yellow, as the Fire Spin residual drops the Undertaker down to just 30 HP. So Fire Spin number 2 comes out, and the Undertaker survives a critical hit with just 2 HP. That was way too close. But our little lizard lives. Serena's final Pokemon is Absol, who Batista easily dispatches, meaning that we've completely survived the first brush with our rival. As we head to face off against the 3rd gym leader, Karina, now's a good time to tell you that I'm doing 0 calcs for this playthrough. Again, Kalos Nuzlocks are notoriously extremely easy, so I figured that this would make for an additional challenge on top of matching the sizes of gym leader teams. But just keep that in mind going forward. Anyways, on paper, Karina's Ace Hawlucha could be pretty damn scary, given that fighting and flying type moves ensure super effective damage into every single one of my Pokemon. But she doesn't actually know a flying type move. I mean, she knows Flying Press, which is fighting and flying type simultaneously, but because of that dual typing, it only hits my Hawlucha for neutral damage. So after Becky Lynch smacks down Mienfoo and Karina sends out her ace, I bring Mysterio in for the mirror. So I guess you could say I have a hawk too, huh?
I want a divorce.
A Hone Claws is a bit scary, especially because Karina's Luchadora is faster, but again, she can't get the one-shot here, and her first Flying Press triggers our Oranberry, which doesn't give us enough HP to survive another hit, but does activate Mysterio's Unburden ability. This means that even though our Aerial Ace also fails to get the KO, we can simply outspeed on the following turn and win the mirror match. So all that's left is Machoke, but he too just falls to 2 more Aerial Aces to win us the battle and the 3rd gym badge. There's but a single route between Shalor City and Comarine City where the 4th gym badge awaits, but on it I can catch yet another encounter, Sasha Banks the minus attack Gutsless Heracross. Lame. Okay, well, there's also a second fight against Serena here, which is virtually identical to the previous one, but since our last battle, I've gotten the Eviolite to boost the Undertaker's defenses, making that matchup significantly less risky. So with that, we've made it to the fight against Ramos, who is excruciatingly unremarkable, even with the added challenges I've imposed on this playthrough. Von Erich takes care of Jump Pluff with a few Rock Tombs, before Mysterio one-shots Go-Go with a critical hit Flying Press, and Weepinbell with a regular Aerial Ace for a quick victory. Now open up the slide, Grandpa. This is why life's worth living. Before continuing the Collision Whirlwind Tour that is the mid-game of this challenge, we need to stop Team Flare from doing crimes at the power plant, which requires facing off against this pesky grunt, who happens to be more dangerous than the previous 4 gym leaders combined, because he has a Golbat that knows Acrobatics. Acrobatics is a 55 base power flying type move that doubles in base power if the user is not holding an item. And since enemy Pokemon, especially in these underbaked games, rarely hold items, it means that this random grunt has a Golbat with a 110 base power stab move that also happens to hit all but one of my Pokemon for super effective damage. And given that Golbat is respectably bulky, speedy, and honestly actually pretty strong, this is kind of a problem. Especially because Uber Grunt leads with a Houndoom who threatens Von Erich with fire-type moves. In hindsight, I should have just banked on Von Erich being able to outspeed and one-shot Houndoom, but I instead opted to use Mysterio. So once the Hellhound falls, Golbat comes out, and now I need to switch. But instead of going for an Acrobatics, Uber Grunt goes for Confuse Ray, meaning that I could be in a lot of trouble if I hit myself in confusion. Unfortunately, I have no other choice but to risk it, which does immediately pay off as we hit Golbat with a Rock Tomb. It's not enough for the KO, but fortunately Uber Grunt just uses Air Cutter. The result is that we're free to stay in for another turn, though this time Von Erich hits himself in confusion, and then Acrobatics comes out for massive damage. Our relatively useless Rocky Helmet does some chip as I once again find myself in a compromised position. I could gamble with hitting through the confusion, but if Von Erich messes up, he'll be dead, and my answers to any and all upcoming Psychic and Fairy types will be significantly worse. So instead I switch to Batista, whose bulk ensures that he survives a full-fledged Acrobatics. Unfortunately, if it does that much to Batista, none of my other Pokemon stand a chance, except maybe Mysterio, but it doesn't seem worth it to risk the critical hit. And unfortunately, Batista doesn't outspeed Golbat even after the speed drop from Rock Tomb. So I need a sacrifice, and based on my current team, Batista the pure fighting type is the most expendable. With a heavy heart, I watch as I lose my first teammate to a random Grunt's random Golbat. So is the Kalos experience. With a bit more preparation, I could have easily made it through that fight without any issues. A Person Berry on Von Erich would have helped, and I should have switched out to Batista a turn earlier to shake off the confusion, and then let Von Erich come back in to finish the job. But mistakes happen, and this time, Batista bore the burden. Kinda wish it was China, but what are you gonna do? After defeating the remaining, significantly easier members of Team Flare, it's off to Lumio City to bring power back to Prism Tower. I really hope the pretty lights were worth Batista's death. He was the best damn Muppet a guy could ask for. Prior to challenging Clement for Gym Badge number 5, the level cap allows both CM Punk and Becky Lynch to evolve into their final forms. It also means that I can bring Steve Austin out of the box and fully evolve him into the fighting type Chestnut. But team upgrades don't stop there, because I can head back to Route 4 and catch Bret Hart the Ralts. With access to the Dawnstone also on Route 4, he fully evolves into Gallade, granting our roster another psychic fighting type, and one with a phenomenal special defense stat. So it's for that reason that he, along with Von Erich and Steve Austin, are responsible for taking on Clement and his electric-type Pokemon. Against his Emolga, I lead with Von Erich, who, as with most other flying-type enemies, nails the rat with a Rock Slide for solid damage before he lands a critical hit Volt Switch that brings Magneton in safely. Since they have the ability Sturdy, I gotta switch to Bret Hart, who takes just enough damage from a Thunderbolt that we're now at risk to a critical hit. But Clement loves to set up electric terrain, so I gamble that it's safe to stay in and fire off a low sweep before my gamble does indeed pay off. After a bit of healing, Bret gets the KO and brings Emolga back out. By using Protect, I stall out the final turn of electric terrain and then switch to Von Erich on a neutral Aerial Ace. Our return then permanently puts Emolga back into his ball, leaving Clement with his ace Heliolisk, who would be scary if it wasn't for Steve Austin. By resisting Thunderbolts, it's completely safe to nail Heliolisk with a single low sweep, which wins us the battle. Next up is the third fight against Serena, and this one is scary because it's the first time that she has her fully evolved starter. The good news is that the new level cap means that I can finally evolve the Undertaker into Scrafty, who should make this much safer. Once again, Von Erich proves to be the perfect counter into Meowstic, using the free speed boost from Steadfast to take the KO before too much damage is done. Well, in this case, Meowstic just sets up Light Screen, so other than the fake out chip, it's actually no damage done. Delphox takes the field next, so with Mystical Fire, I gotta switch to the newly evolved Undertaker, who takes fairly minimal damage. And after eating one more chunk of damage from Mystical Fire number 2, a boosted payback is now enough to one-shot Delphox thanks to his new secondary psychic typing. All in all, this went perfectly. Oh right, Steve Austin also one-shots Absol with Low Sweep for the victory. In the waters of Route 14, I catch my penultimate encounter, Polly the Rock Wag, and with the help of a Water Stone, he fully evolves into Polly the Rock Wrath, finally granting me a Fire-type resistance. He'll be important later, but for now our newest teammate sits on the bench as we face off against the 6th gym leader, Valerie. You might think it weird to lead the Undertaker into the Fairy-type gym leader, but her Mawile doesn't actually have a Fairy-type move. All she knows is Crunch and Feint Attack, which means that the Undertaker barely takes any damage before getting the KO. And using our Uncouth Gecko here also sets us up perfectly to deal with Mr. Mime, who will now always go for Dazzling Gleam instead of Psychic or one of her screens. This means I can get a fairly safe switch to Von Erich, who after somewhat shrugging off the Dazzling Gleam, is free to outspeed and get the KO with a super effective Poison Jab. That just leaves Sylveon, but given that he's much stronger than Mr. Mime, I'm skeptical that Von Erich survives even a non-critical hit, which means that it's time to switch to our ringer, CM Punk. Dazzling Gleam hits for a little more than 50%, but thanks to his held leftovers and a turn of Protect, we can get to a point where he'll survive another one. So CM Punk rips a Poison Jab that brings Sylveon into the red, and poisons as Valerie goes for Charm. Well, had Sylveon not gotten poisoned, that would have actually been a pretty solid play, but unfortunately for Valerie, thanks to the Poison Chip, 2 Poison Jabs will still be enough to get the KO after she heals, especially because we can use Protect to stall for another turn of Chip. So with one last Poison Jab, we've won the battle against Valerie completely deathless. After some mostly boring Team Flare stuff, we arrive in Annister City, where once again, Serena demands a battle before I can challenge the gym leader. She's also finally got another Pokemon, though he isn't really an issue. The main problem remains her Delphox, who now knows Flamethrower, which does much more damage than Mystical Fire, and has the chance to burn. So, after Von Erich disposes of Meowstic for the 4th time, my plan is to first switch to the Rock on a Flamethrower, and then to the Undertaker on a Psychic. The only problem is that Von Erich took a sizable chunk of damage from Meowstic's Psychic, so Serena probably does see the kill with Psychic from her Delphox, meaning that she'll randomly choose between clicking Psychic and Flamethrower. If I do end up switching the Rock in on Psychic, he's probably bulky enough to take it, though a critical hit could be a problem. Nevertheless, a 50-50 into a critical hit is a lot less likely than the burn chance on the Undertaker, so Von Erich switches out, the Rock comes in, and Delphox gets a critical hit Psychic. That's rough. The Rock never even had the chance to shine. Well, with the free switch to the Undertaker, he only needs to tank one Flamethrower before getting the kill with another boosted payback. Jolteon is Serena's newcomer, but he's walled by Steve Austin. Sure, our starter gets paralyzed by Discharge on the switch, and then fully paralyzed 2 turns in a row, but even then, he's bulky enough to brunt Jolteon's attacks and eventually get the KO. Plus, it's better to get rid of Steve Austin's bad RNG now when it doesn't really matter. A Flying Press from Mysterio one-shots the always free Absol, which means that after burying our sweet The Rock, we've earned the right to challenge the 7th gym leader, Olympia. Now, you'd think that the Psychic-type gym leader would be a bit of a problem for our fighting types, especially since Olympia leads with the Psychic Flying-type Sigilif, but this fight is actually extremely straightforward. Von Erich takes care of Sigilif with the combination of Rock Tomb and Shadow Claw, and all she does in between is set up Light Screen, so Von Erich remains at full HP as Slowking comes in second. I take the opportunity to fire off a Shadow Claw, which does way more damage than I was expecting before we get hit by a Yawn. But instead of switching, I decide to just take the KO, falling asleep as Olympia sends out Meowstic last. But unlike Serena's many iterations of Meowstic, this one does not know a Fairy-type move, and as a result, gets completely walled by the Undertaker. One of our Crunches doesn't KO, so after a Hyper Potion heal, I switch to a boosted payback that does. All of a sudden, we've got 7 gym badges, though before we have the time to even think about the 8th, Lysander goes live on IG to announce that he's gonna do some light genocide. Imagine being wiped out by a man that signs off of a Zoom call with a "do." Talk about adding insult to injury. This means that we gotta do a whole lot of Team Flare stuff, including 3 fights against Lysander himself. But as usual, we really only need to focus on the last one where he's sporting a Mega Gyarados. Oh, really quickly though, just gotta shout out my homie Sasha Banks, who did a great job dealing with Xerosic superpower spamming Contrary Malamar. That thing is really scary without a quick way to take him out, so credit where credit is due, she was perfect for the job. Anyways, the final fight against Lysander kicks off with him sending out Mienshao. Oh hey, we have one of those. Unfortunately, ours has a minus speed nature and is therefore not that useful here, so instead I lead Von Erich, who has a plus speed nature. A Protect gets Lysander's Mienshao to crash as he attempts to connect with a high jump kick, which then lets me take the KO with a close combat. This brings out Pyroar second, and again, I'm in a bit of a pickle. If Von Erich outspeeds, we can probably just take the KO with a close combat, but if we don't outspeed, Fire Blast is obviously gonna kill us. And since I'm not confident that we do outspeed, I decide to switch, though not before burning a Fire Blast PP via Protect. The switch brings the Undertaker out, and unfortunately, he immediately finds himself on the receiving end of a critical hit, meaning that even with leftovers and Protect, we're again in a bit of trouble. So now I gotta stall out these remaining 2 ticks of Fire Blast PP, and I do that by first switching to Bret Hart, and then by switching to China the Machoke, who's holding an Eviolite. Good job, Queen, that's what you were here for. Pray you don't find yourself back on the battlefield, if you know what I mean. Now, thinking that Becky Lynch will be strong enough to shrug off a Hyper Voice, I switch her in, but it's here where I find out that Medicham kinda sucks. We were just straight up dead to a critical hit there from a Hyper Voice. Like, are you kidding me? Well, unfortunately, that means I gotta just switch back to the Undertaker, who comes in on a Dark Pulse that does basically nothing. After protecting for some recovery, we then tank a Hyper Voice, which again would have killed with a crit. Why is Pyroar so freaking strong? This one's not even rivalry boosted. But since our Brick Break doesn't one-shot, I've now got no other choice but to switch to Von Erich on a resisted Hyper Voice. And rather frustratingly, we then outspeed, meaning that I could have just stayed in and clicked close combat. So all of that was a massive waste of time. Though I guess it's true that after 2 close combats, Von Erich would have been far less equipped to deal with the Haunch Crow that comes in third. But now that we don't have the drops, we're free to deal big damage with Rock Tomb, tank a neutral Aerial Ace, and then get the KO with an Aura Sphere. So all that's left is Lysander's Gyarados, but this guy is walled moderately well by Steve Austin, the only one of my Pokemon that remains at full HP. And as Lysander Mega evolves, it conveniently drops Gyarados' flying typing. The result is that after eating a resisted Waterfall on the switch that does damage from Rocky Helmet, we can go for Spiky Shield for a little more chip damage before eating a nasty Outrage that also does Rocky Helmet chip, and then taking the KO with a now Overgrow boosted, super effective Seed Bomb. It's been a long time since I've won this fight deathless, but it just goes to show ya, never doubt Mr. Steve Austin. With Lysander defeated and the Great Weapon destroyed or whatever, we're free to finish our quest to become champions of the Pokemon League. En route to Kuriway Town, I catch my final encounter, a girder named John Cena, who with Rock Slide helps us defeat Sycamore's Charizard, who would have otherwise been a bit of a problem. The Rival Bridge Gauntlet on Route 19 is next, but there's little here to challenge my team given the questionable movesets on some of these Pokemon. Shauna's Delcatty gets smacked by Von Erich's Aura Sphere, Goodra gets locked into Earthquake with Encore from Mysterio and then proceeds to die, before Greninja gets one-shot by the Undertaker. Tierno's Talonflame doesn't have a Fire-type move, so is crushed by Von Erich's Rock Tomb, his Crawdaunt dies to a close combat, and his Roserade only knows Petal Dance and is therefore walled by Sasha Banks. So last and certainly least is Torbo, or whatever his name is, and Steve Austin deals with his Raichu, Von Erich disposes of the sky-dropping Aerodactyl, and our go-to fairy killer CM Punk one-shots Florges with a single stab poison jab. Yay, friendship! In Snowbell City, we face off against the final gym leader Wolfric, whose 3 ice types all get one shot by Von Erich. Fun! So with that, we've made it to Victory Road, where the 5th and final Serena fight awaits. And though she has an additional Pokemon, this matchup is nothing we haven't seen before. Von Erich takes out Meowstic, I risk China's life to get the safe switch into the Undertaker, who gets the one-shot on Delphox with a payback. CM Punk takes care of the new Dazzlingly Malteria, as well as the old Jolteon that comes out next, and then Steve Austin deletes Absol, winning us the battle. Which means that we've made it to the Elite Four, and I'm not gonna pretend like we've had a particularly tough time getting here. Other than a handful of fights, our journey has been pretty smooth sailing. Minor deaths aside, we've yet to face any truly difficult challenges, but that's about to change, because this Elite Four is actually a pretty big problem, and even a little bit of bad luck could ruin our chances at victory. There are a lot of Pokemon here with super effective Psychic, Fairy, and Flying type moves. The 2 Pokemon with Flying type moves are particularly tricky, since Von Erich is our only teammate who takes neutral damage from Flying type moves, but both Malva's Talonflame and Drasna's Noivern also have Fire type moves to hit him for super effective damage, while of course also naturally outspeeding. So this is gonna be tough. But I've put together what I'm hoping are the best 6 fighters for the job, though as a reminder, I'll only be allowed to use 4 of them in each fight. The only surprise on the team here is that I've decided to bring Ric Flair, who's evolved into a Mienshao since we last saw him. He'll be important for exactly one thing, but with the team assembled, let's see if they've got what it takes to bring it all home. First up, Wickstrom, the Steel-type trainer, and this is the one member of the Elite Four we have an easy matchup into. Against Plefki, Von Erich fires off Earthquakes for an easy kill, though the little fairy does hit us with a Torment and set up a layer of spikes before going down. Probopass is second and has Sturdy, so he survives a shot from our Aura Sphere. Though instead of letting Von Erich then take another KO, I decide to switch to Steve Austin on an Earth Power and let him get the kill. This brings out Aegislash, and with the combo of Leech Seed, Spiky Shield, and additional damage via Seed Bomb, Steve whittles him down without taking too much damage. So all that remains is Scizor, who I take care of with the Undertaker and his held Rocky Helmet. With Wickstrom defeated, I decide to target Drasna next, and my team is the same as before, only this time my lead is Becky Lynch. With the held Wide Lens, she fires off a nearly perfectly accurate Zen Headbutt to one-shot Dragalge. This brings in Altaria, who we snipe off with a Speedy Ice Punch. But third is Noivern, and no amount of speed EVs is gonna let us outspeed her. So my best bet is to tank an Air Slash and hope that we don't get crit or flinched, which turns out just fine as our Ice Punch connects for the clean KO. Suddenly, all that remains is Druddigon, who's a skosh annoying with Dragon Tail, but eventually we hit her with a Leech Seed, and from there, it's just a matter of patiently switching around and taking pot shots when it's safe to do so. Many turns later, Steve Austin finally gets the kill with a Brick Break, winning us the battle against the second member of the Elite Four. But next is the tricky bit, Malva and her Talonflame, which is where Ric Flair is gonna come in clutch. I lead with Von Erich though, because against Malva's Pyroar, he can get a clean one-shot with Aura Sphere, and then immediately bait in Talonflame. My Steel type always baits Flare Blitz here, so I hard switch into Rick, who eats the hit reasonably well. Critically, he takes just less than 50%, and his Rocky Helmet, along with recoil from Flare Blitz, does a sizable chunk of damage to Talonflame. We can then do a little more chip with Fake Out on the following turn, but after that, I switch back to Von Erich, who now comes in on the baited Brave Bird. With the recoil from that move, I'm hoping that Talonflame is low enough to get taken out by a Silk Scarf boosted Extreme Speed, and she is. There was absolutely a world where I just sacrificed Ric Flair there, which probably would have been a safer play, but in the end, it all worked out. Torkoal is third, and by using Encore from Mysterio to lock him into Curse, I can safely switch back to Von Erich and take the KO with an Aura Sphere. So that leaves Chandelure, but Malva throws the match by going for Confide instead of doing damage with Flamethrower, which lets the Undertaker get the Oko with a payback. All of a sudden, we've made it to the final member of the Elite Four, Siebold. His Starmie and Gyarados are tricky, but we've got answers for both of them. First, though, is Clawitzer, who immediately falls to a Seed Bomb from Steve Austin. Then as Starmie comes in second, I decide to stay in and risk a critical hit Psychic, which turns out to be the right call given that Siebold decides to just set up a Light Screen. So Seed Bomb gets a second OHKO. That brings in Gyarados though, and with Dragon Dance, he's really tricky to play around. I decide that my best bet is to set up Leech Seed, but after eating an Ice Fang, our first one misses. Another Ice Fang again hits hard, but without any flinches or freezes, our second Leech Seed connects, and at this point, it's over for Seabold. I decide to just immediately switch to Becky Lynch as Gyarados goes for a third Ice Fang, so since our foe bizarrely chose to never set up Dragon Dance, Becky is just free to take the KO with Thunder Punch. That leaves Barbaracle, but Steve Austin can come back in and take another KO with another Seed Bomb, which wins us the final battle of the Elite Four completely deathless. So despite all my hemming and hawing about how difficult this could have been, everything turned out just fine, which means that we were on to the final challenge of the playthrough, the 6v6 fight against Diantha. A face-off so monumentally epic that it can only be shown by a reenactment via paper puppets, as is channel tradition. So sit back, relax, and get ready for an epic showdown the likes of which you've never seen. Diantha leads with Hawlucha, so it's time for Mysterio to jump into the ring and start taking some names. With an acrobatics, he instantly one-shots his feminine doppelganger and forces out Aurorus next. But a quad-affected Brick Break is enough for our masked Marauder to get a second consecutive one-shot. This brings in Tyrantrum, who's just too strong for Mysterio, so he tags in Von Erich on a nasty head smash. But that's exactly according to our plan. Von Erich now baits Earthquake, granting a quick switch back to Mysterio, who locks the Prehistoric Dragon in with Encore, and then takes the kill with 2 more Brick Breaks. We're already halfway through Diantha's team, folks, and the momentum's showing no sign of stopping. As Goodra comes in next, Mysterio swaps out to the Undertaker on a Dragon Pulse. He then baits Focus Blast, allowing for a resisted switch to Becky Lynch, as Goodra actually connects. Wow. With that though, Ice Punches are enough to get the KO. So the final Pokemon before Diantha's Mega Evolving Ace is Gourgeist. And thanks to the damage from her teammates' attacks, she wants to KO Becky Lynch with a priority Shadow Sneak, granting us a safe switch back to Mysterio, who then snags his 4th KO of the fight with another Acrobatics. At last, Gardevoir takes the stage, but it's here where things could all go wrong. I decide that I need to do damage, and though Mysterio knows Poison Jab, his full-powered Stab Acrobatics is still better. Either way, I fear it won't be enough, and that Mysterio is certainly dead. As Diantha's Ace evolves into her powerful Mega, I prepare to say goodbye to Mysterio. With a mighty battle cry, he fires off one last Acrobatics. That straight up one-shots. He did it! Mysterio lives, and just like that, we've defeated not only Diantha, but the entire run. Except we didn't. What you just saw was not the truth. It was a lie, and it's been a lie since the start of the Elite Four. Unfortunately, the truth, what really happened, is much more tragic. In reality, I decided to start the Elite Four by fighting Seabold, which was my first mistake. My second was leading Becky Lynch. The hope was that she'd be able to sweep through Clawitzer, Starmie, and Gyarados, but despite holding a Zap Plate, she's not even strong enough to one-shot Clawitzer. This lets Seabold fire off a Water Pulse for massive damage and an untimely confusion. As a result, I have to switch out to Steve Austin on the heal, though as we saw before, at least we can outspeed and get the one-shot with Seed Bomb. My third mistake happens against Starmie, where after tanking a nasty Psychic, I decide to hit him with a Leech Seed instead of taking the KO via Seed Bomb. Though, to be fair, I didn't know whether we would actually get that KO. With leftovers and Spiky Shield, Steve Austin's able to get back to over 50% before I switch out to the Undertaker on another Psychic. He baits Dazzling Gleam, which grants a safer switch to Von Erich, who's then free to take the kill on Starmie with a Shadow Claw. So far, this has been sloppy, but not disastrous, though that's about to change as Gyarados takes the field. With Earthquake, I gotta switch back to Steve Austin, but instead of going for damage, Seabold opts for a Dragon Dance, thereby ensuring that Gyarados now outspeeds all 4 of my Pokemon. I reason that my only play here is to stall with Leech Seed, but after Gyarados sets up a second Dragon Dance, Steve Austin misses. Then a +2 Ice Fang comes out and does massive damage, before Steve misses his second Leech Seed in a row. And from there, we're done. There's basically no coming back from that. After doing some chip with Spiky Shield, I switch out to the Undertaker. Ice Fang doesn't do much, but it's enough for a +2 waterfall on the next turn to get the KO. Rocky Helmet chip has brought Gyarados down to around 50%, but it doesn't matter. Chestnut can do a little more damage with another tick of Spiky Shield damage, before then dying to an Ice Fang on the following turn. Next is Lucario, who can fire off a priority extreme speed, but without the critical hit, there's nothing stopping Gyarados from firing off an Earthquake and getting his third KO. This does let me bring in Becky Lynch for free, and with Gyarados in the red, Seabold does heal, letting us take the KO with a Thunder Punch, but at this point, it's too late. We still have to deal with Barbaracle, and since Becky doesn't know a fighting type move, we can't get the one-shot, which means that my fourth Pokemon falls to a Razor Shell before we can win the fight. Now technically, we do have 2 more Pokemon left, but based on the anime addendum I set at the start of the playthrough, this is a wipe, and I have failed. At the end of the day, this Elite Four was always going to require risking some RNG. Most runs do, and while you can usually get away with risking the occasional crit or clicking a 90% accurate move, every now and then you do get punished, and for me, that's what happened this time. It sucks, but I also could have done a lot of things differently. I put way too much stake in Becky Lynch, and there were probably a few other plays at the end that could have saved a handful of my Pokemon, like switching back into Steve Austin for more Spiky Shield chip instead of letting the Undertaker go down to a waterfall for free. And had I just done Seabold last, there was a tiny chance that those remaining Pokemon would have been enough to defeat Diantha, given that we did sweep most of her team with Mysterio. Nuzlocks are tough, and no matter how many you do, there's always room for growth, things to improve upon, and lessons to be learned. Losing, wiping, making mistakes, it's all part of the experience, and no one is immune to it, which is why I think it's important to include runs where I fail instead of pretending like they didn't happen. For those of you watching these videos sequentially, I'm sorry for putting out 2 semi-downer endings back to back, but in my defense, I truly did not expect to wipe here, and hopefully you still enjoyed watching. If you did, it'd be great if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Or don't, I don't know, but I do know that you should follow me on Twitch to keep up with streams of my current ROM hack challenges. Stay tuned for more Nuzlocke videos, and until then, remember to always, always, always play around the critical hit.